Hi, and welcome to the 9 Feet Tall webinar today on the creating a winning approach to effective service design. Today we are joined by Tiggy, a partner at 9 Feet Tall, and Laleh. And I'm going to first of all just ask you both to introduce yourself. So Laleh, can we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you work and what your passions are?
Yeah, sure. Hi. Well, thank you for inviting me. My name's Laleh Williams. I'm Head of Organisation and People Development. I work at the University of Greenwich and I'm part of the People Directorate. So that's human resources for anybody that's not familiar with that terminology. I've been at the university for about 7 years and I've been working in aspects around organisation development, employee engagement, learning and development, transformation, work in terms of sort of trying to think about sort of technology and agile design implementation. And before that, I worked in Camden Council, which is where I first actually worked with Tiggy. And the university, at Camden, we were doing a huge sort of transformation programme with 9 Feet Tall, really supporting our austerity development and programs of work, and a lot of work that we did there was all about sort of customer excellence, customer service first values, and I would say that sort of the thing I'm most passionate about is really good values-led organisations, ones that really put people first. It's fantastic to have great systems, it's fantastic to have fantastic buildings, but people actually make all the difference, and for me that's a huge privilege and a huge part of what I love to do in my role. And I think as I work more and more in that space, what I'm trying to see is actually the impact on our customers. In a university, that's very easy because you walk in a university and you see your students all the time. But actually, it's very difficult if you work in other sectors. So for me, it's a little bit about the more we can flatten that sort of journey, the better it is in terms of how we all feel when we're at work. And we've kind of hopefully come out of it feeling like we've done something different and valuable.
Fantastic, thank you. So interesting. We can see why we asked you to come and talk to us today. And then Tiggy, if you could touch upon your relationship already with Laleh.
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Tiggy Atkinson. I'm a partner at 9 Feet Tall. We're a management consultancy and we do a lot of work in change and organisational design and development, service design. I worked with Laleh at Camden, as she said, a few years ago now, on a big OD transformation programme, and part of that was looking at service design, HR service design in particular. So my role in 9 Feet Tall is delivering people change, basically, so complex change programs, which I love. That's my massive passion. Looking at culture and how to get teams to be more productive, and also how to deliver best value to customers and clients. And then in my other life, I'm a chair of the board at Jessie May, which is a children's hospice at home charity. So we provide respite and nursing support to children and families when they're at end of life and into bereavement, so support for families during bereavement for 5 years afterwards. So I've got sort of two hats that I wear most of the time.
Fantastic. Now, we'll be asking a bunch of questions to both Laleh and Tiggy today, but if you do have any questions yourself, please do pop them in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat so that we can ask them during our time. We're also recording the session, so if you'd like to send it on to your colleagues or peers or watch it back at another point, then keep an eye on your inbox, where we'll be sending you a link to the recording, but also an opportunity to kind of pick our brains at 9 Feet Tall for a 90-minute session about service design. So, jumping straight in, Tiggy, can you tell us what the key principles of effective service design are?
I can try, because that's quite a big topic. I think so. When we're talking about service design today, so in my mind, I'm thinking about all things. So either looking at a service which has been set up and something that you want to review and improve, hopefully, or a big transformation program that is actually going to deliver a new strategy, and as part of that you're going to have to change the way that you deliver some of your services, or equally picking out an aspect of service delivery or design which isn't working right now, and fixing a little bit of it. So I think for all of those, a really key thing and a sort of guiding principle is understanding the purpose. So what are you trying to deliver, to whom, and why? So being really clear on purpose. I also think that engaging with and understanding your customers, your service users, your clients, however, whatever language you use, but you can't do effective service design without engaging with those key stakeholders, but also your own teams on the ground who are delivering that service for you. So sort of avoiding the top down service design approach, I think it is really important. I think getting that the sense between what service users need and what the organisation can deliver, there's a bit of a balance there to understand what is feasible and possible, and be innovative about that. So you don't want to constrain yourself into just because of what you currently can do, but I think also it needs to be based in some kind of reality as well. So just going for totally blue sky thinking is great, but actually practically how are you going to phase and deliver that, and making sure that it's grounded in some sense of practical timeframes, I think is personally really helpful. And the other thing I think is effective service design for me is about linking up teams that traditionally may not have worked very well together or understood each other very well. So frontline teams who are out there day-to-day delivering service with back office or more centralized teams, sometimes there's a friction between those teams and they're not getting what they need from each other. So I think a core element of service design is getting all of that out and understanding what some of the challenges are, and then trying to work through solutions that are actually going to bridge some of those challenges.
Clarifying or removing some of those assumptions, not only in terms of what is the most painful or the most challenging thing, but also how are people using the tools or delivering the service.
Yeah, I don't know, Laleh, if you've got any other ones to add, but those are just some of the ones that I thought about, which were key when I've been involved in service design before.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's an interesting one because I kind of think more of it on an example base. So if you like, I work in HR, so it's not my bread and butter to do service design. But what I often find myself actually being drawn into in terms of projects is being able to give a little bit of a view around the kind of culture of the staff that you're trying to support, in terms of where are they now, where would they need to be, what would that journey look like in terms of have they got some of the skills, some of the interests, some of the values, some of the capabilities to do some of those things. And I like to use the sort of acronym sort of right size teams doing the right things in the right on the right priorities with the right skills. And I think if you've kind of unpick those things as part of your service design and sort of almost audit them, it's a lot easier to kind of then think actually that's a strand of your change that you're trying to introduce. And when do you do it and how do you phase it as part of all the other work that you need to do, which is really about problem analysis. What is the size of the problem that you have? How prevalent is it? What's the appetite for in terms of actually it amongst the other priorities of problems that you're always having to deal with and conundrums that you're trying to then redesign? Because often what you're trying to do is create more value at the front part of any service and less waste at the end. Hopefully the customer will feel that there's a huge benefit because they'll have had more things delivered in the right way at the right time. And hopefully they had their problem resolved fairly early on in a journey rather than at the very end in terms of all of those missteps. But how much can your staff do some of that? And what's the change load and what's the demand on them to be able to kind of succeed in that environment? So from my perspective, you know, what we're trying to always do. And in a university, to be honest, we've got lots and lots of students that we always have to make sure that are prioritised in terms of their timetables, in terms of the kind of, you know, core things that they're expected to do in terms of their degrees. So instances where we can shake up some of our transformations are pretty small windows. Sometimes we can only do in between terms.
Yeah.
And therefore you absolutely have to phase all of those things within downtimes of the terms, and then hope that, you know, you can bring those key teams together, whether they are multidisciplinary, so whether it's, you know, HR working with other professional services and some of the faculties, they must all be available to be able to think about some of those issues in a meaningful way, and then be able to talk about actually how they can do sort of sprints of work, and then being able to kind of measure if that's been successful in terms of any kind of change. So there is a little bit of just thinking all of those through from a very practical sense.
I agree.
So those are some of the things that we experience. At a university level, we tend to use an evidence-based approach. It's not unusual. It's a university. It deals with research and evidence all the time. One of the things, I know, again, terminology is a bit of an awkward one. It makes it sound far, far more complicated than it actually is. But if we use what we call a theory of change model, which I think is basically, it's come from public sectors, but it's all again about what is the problem, why has that problem occurred, is the most significant thing that's stopping progress, and then effectively trying to think about what are all the outputs that you would need to change, and then what are all the inputs behind that would need to be reframed. And then finally, the most important thing is the evaluation. And I think for me, that you talked a little bit about challenge. Evaluation is the hardest bit, because we initially don't really know what we're trying to evaluate in terms of the sort of, you know, things that would have changed. And it takes some time to kind of use surveys, to kind of use focus groups, to use things that might tell us something meaningful around some of the improvements that have occurred, really. And then to be able to attribute those back to some resources that we need to then build up and then reinvest in. So the evaluation piece is always the hugest challenge, I think, getting enough data, but getting quality data and evaluating whether that actually made a difference. You can sometimes stop your pilots in that process, just to see if it is a contributor or if it isn't. And then hopefully what you will find is that actually your hypothesis was that, yes, those are important ingredients in any of the services that you are trying to improve. So
yeah,
it's
making those data-driven decisions. Those insights. You touched upon a theory there in terms of the theory of change. Tiggy, are there any other kind of big design thinking or methodologies that people listening should go away and research or look at? Or is it actually quite a vast field, and it kind of depends what it is that you're focusing on? Or
well, it is a vast field, and there are different approaches and methodologies. I don't know if anyone on the call wants to put in the chat or put their hands up if they have a particular approach or methodology that they're currently using. It'd be really good to do a bit of a check to see. I suppose the key ones that I've used that I've found helpful in the past, it's a bit of a mix. So I'll talk through each one. Is the first one, which was really prevalent in Camden, was systems thinking. So trying to understand the service within the context of all of the interactions that go on, to make that service function. And I think it's really it's helpful. So it's helpful when you're trying to deal with, which I'm sure most of our listeners are, with complex scenarios where there are multiple interactions, multiple relationships, and things that are visible to your service users and things that totally aren't visible but can really impact whether something is perceived to be a great service or actually really not a good service at all. So I think, so systems thinking for me, I mean, it's a four-stage model. A lot of the models are pretty similar, actually. So it's about understanding what your goal is and getting your collaborative team together, then understanding your current situation. So what is the system that you're operating within, and who are all the partners that are involved in that, and getting that mapped out. And that's normally a really collaborative endeavor to map, physically draw out what is this system that the complex system that you're operating within, and then start to think about co-design and testing some hypotheses and some theories. So we did this in HR, it was great. So, you know, we had theories about whether business partnering model it would work. So we would go and come up with a hypothesis, test it out, capture data and feedback about whether that was working. And if it did work, great, we'd iterate, move on, improve it. And if it didn't, we would stop, evaluate why, and then try and ideate and move on to a new idea or a different branch of that thinking. And it was very, very practical. And the team were really engaged in it. And I think that really worked in terms of people not feeling done to and designing the sort of future of the service.
And that trial and error approach, does that mean that you were able to make progress quicker in some way?
Absolutely, yes, because I think the concept of a prototyping or a minimum viable service or product is really key, because as you say, if you wait to have everything perfectly designed and signed off and all the training done, you can't deliver value until the very end. So this iterative nature of design, ideate or come up with ideas, then prototype that, try it out, evaluate whether it's any good and build on it or start again, is really key in pretty much all of the methods and approaches that I've been using in the past, 10 years, I would say. That sort of iterative, don't wait, big bang till the end, try and get value to the teams and to your end users and customers as soon as you can, I think is really important. The other sort of method or school of thinking that we have used quite a bit is design thinking, which I really like. So I'm not wanting to teach people to suck eggs, but if you haven't heard of it before, it's sort of born out of software and customer experience development. So based in tech originally, but a way of thinking, of placing humans in the center of designs, of customer experience design. And that has 5 stages, but it's really, really similar to systems thinking. So you start off by empathizing and understanding what's going on here and how does it feel to be delivering this service or receiving the service, so that you can then actually define what the challenge is and what's the problem statement you're trying to fix. And then before you do all that, I know what we could do this, really make sure that your understanding of what's going on is solid. And I think we did some of this, Laleh, didn't we, in terms of understanding demand and how it comes in and what is great and what we want to be servicing and what's just waste and failure demand that just bings about and doesn't get sorted and creates a lot of work and a lot of it consumes a lot of effort. It's frustration. So to understand that situation before you go on to say, right, well, we've got some ideas about how we can fix things. So a lot of the effort in design thinking is up front, and then you go through the ideation process, and it encourages innovative ideas and thinking outside the box, which is great, before you get into prototyping and building up some hypotheses and testing that. So it's similar in approach. And for me, I think using systems thinking up front to understand the totality of what you're trying to work on and who you need to engage, and it's normally quite a big cast of people in that, before you use something like design thinking to actually do the practical thinking about design is helpful. And we also use so moving into Laleh's world a little bit, once we've got some ideas about what we would need to do in the design of a new service or a reimagined service, we use something called operating model canvas. So I don't know if people have heard of that before. It's from a company called Strategizer. They do something called the business model canvas as well. So if people want to go away and look that up, if they haven't heard of it, it's really useful. But that helps with some of the org design elements that come out of these service design conversations. So what are the processes you need to put in place to deliver value to your end user or your service user, your customer, and what's the organization structure need to look like to support that? What suppliers you're going to work with, what locations are your teams based in, and what then sort of management information do you need, what reporting, what data? We'll probably talk about data in a bit. It's big. I know Lauren's very keen on it, and Laleh as well. So data and evidence base, and also then what supporting structures need to sit underneath to make it all work. So the operating model canvas I've found very helpful, and also we sometimes we put a bit of lean in there as well, so lean thinking. So this, so understanding value, the value stream, and understanding the demand and which bits of it are valuable and which bits are not. So sorry, that was a massive ramble.
No, and when you were talking there, so I have previous experience working in the not-for-profit sector, but also with universities, and I could see how putting, if you're looking at the service for supporters, putting them in the heart of it. And similarly, Laleh, I guess with you at the moment with students or your academic team, who is it we're trying to solve a problem for, and what is the actual problem rather than our perception of the problem, perhaps?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, I agree with all of it. I think one of the most important and useful stages is the collaborative element, because actually there are loads and loads of people who've got solutions, but coming together and to be able to map out in the same language on one sort of, diagram almost, and to understand and see that actually there are so many additional steps that potentially are just building over time, just really for quality assurance, consistency checking, but they're not adding a lot of value. Part of that is more helpful in terms of then the embedding of any sort of final design, because most people have then actually realised things have added over time incrementally to make something more complicated, usually because we're a little bit aware of actually if something's gone wrong, we'll just add this step here, or we'll just add some of this activity over here, and this will safeguard here, here and here. But actually it doesn't create an awful lot of sense when you start to see that actually we're talking about maybe 1% or 2% in terms of problems that we're trying to resolve versus the value of a 90%, which is coming through about having more streamlined activity, better decisions made earlier by those experts, and for them to actually have access to a lot of the kind of principles of the information that they should have had, and also thinking a little bit around actually if there is too much information overload and just simplifying that. So for me, the elements of iteration are really valuable when you've understood the totality of some of the problems fully through a mapped process, and spending more time on that it feels a bit over cumbersome and over sort of complicated, but in practical senses most people come out feeling far more liberated that you can do something very practical quite quickly because they can see the whole trajectory of some of the issues. I'm just thinking about something that I did really early when I came to the university. Was for some unknown reason, we used to add an additional step in terms of one of our development programs. It was a development program that basically meant that everybody that joined a university would do a teaching qualification so that they could be qualified to teach in a university. The registration was the most complicated part because you had to register with a professional body. And for some reason, nobody wanted to hold the information centrally. They wanted it to be in two places, and nobody could understand how much complexity that created. We just ended up with two sets of data that never ever matched. And there was so many problems then trying to mine and understand why we had those problems. Whereas in the end, what we agreed to do was that they would just only be needing to have one potential resource area for the data. And we would find a way of licensing it and resolving it and making sure that it was just held centrally, and that team would be upskilled to have it. But it was just that ability to see the whole picture, and that actually we'd overcomplicated things just a little bit by having separate teams. And we suddenly just went, oh, okay, this is all we need to do.
Yeah, and I guess that value comes from kind of stepping out of your day-to-day task list and just taking a step back and looking at it with kind of the right people in the room, or hopefully the right people in the room. And I guess on that, Laleh, do you have any advice on, we've talked about collaboration, we talked about the right people in the room, the inputs. How do you engage with stakeholders to make sure that they're showing up to those sessions and kind of present and adding value?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one. I think absolutely for me, centrally is if it's going to align with your strategy and your values, then there is a really compelling argument and a reason to turn up, because effectively that's what we're all working to in an organisation usually. So it feels like actually there's purpose if we turn up and want to actually be part of that position and to help evolve it. So from the very beginning, you have to really ask, is that some of the things that this does align with in terms of if you'll redesign or you'll need to look at a design of a service? Would that support the values and deepening them, and will that support strategic deliverables? And I think once that is really answered with yourselves and with your key stakeholders, then it's much, much easier to kind of almost build the engagement piece around the time and letting people have the time to be able to absorb a little bit around what we're asking of them, being really clear about what would happen if they come into workshops, helping them really just take those steps with you. And then they can see that actually they aren't just there to take on more work or just do it for the sake of it. They are there to actually make sure that they have talked about these problems. They are also some of the best people to answer some of these issues. But if their time is maximised in such a way that actually they can see a very clear sort of rationale and business plan at the beginning, right the way through to when it will actually culminate into a project that will be almost signed off, it's a lot easier. So for me, there's always a case of think about this sort of communication piece and the channels, and then hopefully you've got your key stakeholders that already instructed you to help them with that journey. And you can find it's a lot easier for people to kind of come in and hook in. So from my perspective, it's make it very, very visible that time is really about adding importance to the values that they're trying to achieve, and not actually the strategic deliverables. They're all there to actually deliver as well. So there's some of that.
I think my experience echoes yours in that the key thing, if you're inviting people to collaborate, is to give them upfront information about what it is that you're doing, how long they're going to be involved in the project for, what they need to do to prepare for a session like that. Because if you just come in cold, it invariably isn't going to be productive for the first half an hour. And people's time is so precious, isn't it? So the more information you can give up front, so if you're going to use a framework, share what the framework is. If you're going to, and maybe give an opportunity for people to ask questions before they come, and then prep them with what they need to be thinking about before they turn up to engage with you, so that you get that time that you've got them for is absolutely all about getting the information that you want out of people and getting them thinking. So I think you can do a lot in terms of really practical stuff to get people ready for the key things, focus groups or workshops or however you're choosing to engage. So when you get their time, you're on it and you get everything you need in that session. You don't have to then do lots of follow-ups.
I think also for me, I don't know if this has been your experience, Tiggy, but sometimes actually some of the people that aren't even sort of, day to day in terms of actually they are part and parcel of the sort of service delivery, but they are people that have got very, very good insights. Also, if they are there able to add value to some of the workshops that you're actually leading. So, for example, I remember in Camden, when we were all talking about recruitment and it being quite a complicated and, cumbersome and many-stepped process, there was a lot that, we could do in sort of learning and development to think about what it was like for us to be delivering inductions, delivering training to managers, and thinking about all of those steps and actually how much was really adding sort of a valuable piece to the recruitment process. And we then scaled back a lot in terms of when we were recruiting, what we were asking of people to kind of produce. So, for example, we didn't need every single thing around sort of, their ability to work in the UK at the beginning. We could ask for it at the end if they were appointed. I know it sounds really obvious, but it's being able to sit down with other people and just kind of say, well, these are the questions that are always coming up and we don't understand why we are doing this either. So, inviting not just the service users, but people that may have other insights and have got an interest, because they're actually dealing with some of those same challenges in terms of the criticisms outside, was really useful. And I think the one thing that I always remember about working with your team in terms of 9 Feet Tall was you were engaging not just the service users, but people that would be very interested and also had quite a strong opinion about how things could be improved across HR. And that was really valuable in terms of being able to feel like we could contribute to it meaningfully.
I think that it's interesting though, because some of the things that are great about engaging also can be challenges, because the more people you engage, the longer it takes, the longer it takes to get to decisions. So I think it's having a clear plan about who you engage with and why and at what stage in the process, and having thought that through before you go out and communicate.
And I was going to ask Tiggy, when you've got lots of voices and you've got lots of opinions, is there anyone whose voice is more important when it comes to service design?
Well, I suppose diplomatically, I would say everybody's voice is equally as important. In reality, I think service users' voices are absolutely key, aren't they? Because you've got to understand what are their needs, their challenges, their frustrations with an existing service, or if it's a new service, really understanding what they need and how they will access services. I think the teams who are delivering service equally are completely invaluable, because they've seen what works and what doesn't work. And I suppose the other thing which I think sometimes gets lost is going out and looking externally at what others do. So often there's like a temptation to redesign and innovate internally, and what can we possibly do? And actually there's so much valuable information, and I think most organizations these days are willing to share their own experiences and their own challenges that they've had and the rabbit holes they've been down. And so I think actually, I'm not saying it's equally as important, but I think it is important to go and see, talk to other similar organizations, maybe considered to be competitors, but do it anyway, just to see what they have explored and tried. And most of the time people are really happy to do that. So those three for me are ones that you can't kind of do service design without.
Yeah, my top three are exactly the same. There really isn't a sort of, divergence there. I mean, I guess you'll always have the interested party who might be a sort of senior manager also at the side, who might have always been your ally but your critic at the same time. And I think it's keeping them engaged and again in the appropriate way. But for me, it is always that the individuals that are kind of dealing with it at the coalface will really, really have almost 60 to 70% of the kind of ideas as well. And, then our customers are really the ones that can kind of help us finesse it. And I think that's the difference, is that they really can kind of say, well, it's fine just to have this. We, again, as service deliverers might sometimes want to overcomplicate it and make it feel a little bit over secure, and actually they might be very happy with something very streamlined and very simple.
We talked about it earlier a little bit, but I wanted to touch upon kind of insights and data and how we can sort of back up some of these either assumptions or decisions, or qualify and validate some things that perhaps we're hearing in these workshops and forums. I wonder if either of you have any advice or tips on that.
I think so in terms of gathering data, again, it sounds really dull, but planning how you're going to do that. So how are you going to capture data? So obviously there's existing historical data about the service provision as it currently is. And normally there are good sources for that. So survey information, focus groups. If you've got tech, then actually understanding, if you've got websites or you've got portals, what are when are people accessing things, when are people dropping off, how many inquiries actually translate into actually delivered services, customer satisfaction, client satisfaction about what you've delivered. You know, there's loads and loads of data normally available, but planning what you're going to use and at what point to understand the current situation, I think is really important. And then I think for future, so when we were writing our kind of hypothesis / experiments, we would agree what data points we were going to capture during that. So often it would be about things like response times, it would be about service user feedback, team feedback, improvements in productivity, in reduction in actual demand, because we cleared out a load of waste that previously was pinging around particular services. So we would work really hard to understand what data we were going to need and then how we were going to collect it. And I think that it's quite a lot of this is in planning, isn't it? And I think a key thing is having a project team or people who are dedicated to doing the work. So that's the biggest challenge I find in charities sector, is just having dedicated resource, because everybody's so busy. But I think if you want to do this well, it's very hard if you're just asking people to do it on top of their jobs, and invariably it will take longer, or the quality of what you end up doing won't be as good. So I think planning that out, understanding whose role it is to capture the data, and making sure that you've got enough support to get that done is key.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that. In terms of, we're quite lucky in the university again, it's very data driven. So we do have whole teams that really support us internally. I think, you know, the advice I've always had from those teams are, even if you don't have very much capacity, the most important thing is to try and measure the most pertinent data points and to try and see if that's good enough quality to evaluate something from. And if you're not happy with that, use something else. They were always kind of like, you don't have to be set in stone with your data points. Try something until you find it helps you make some evaluations of what you're trying to do. And I think that's been the most useful advice I've ever had, because, you know, in HR, we've probably got about 60 to 70 data points now. And, you know, it all comes through surveys, it all comes through focus groups, it all comes, and it is overwhelming. There's an awful lot to process. And if it's all just in time, you know, you can't get trends, and you need some trends for some amount of time so that you can draw something meaningful. So again, they were really kind of clear, our planning and statistics kind of experts, to spend more time on the measurables and the evaluation more than trying to capture too much, because otherwise it is, you can't really process it all either. So I suppose those were the best 2 tips I've been given. Maybe just try and go for 6 or 7. As I say, we've got 50 or so. They're trying to get me to scale back to maybe 6 or 7 measurable areas that we would want to map over time and evaluate.
Yeah, because I think in the actual design of the service itself, like you say, identifying what the data capture points and the methods are going to be. And I think it gets more complicated, doesn't it? Because service design now predominantly is delivered in a hybrid way. So it's online and it's in person. Some are just online, some are just in person, but in the main it's going to be hybrid. So understanding what your data collection points are going to be can be complicated, because it depends what route and what part of the you know, the journey that you're talking about. So I think you're right, it's planning and trying to start off simple. Simple data set, see if it works, and then build on that afterwards. The kind of iterative, you know, start with something simple and then build on it if you're successful, or if you need to double back, then do that.
Yeah, and they've always said to me, use a sort of basket of measures approach. I know, again, horrible terminology, but they just said put one in and then add more to the basket over time. And I thought that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But I guess what we're describing there might actually be a bit of a cultural shift as well for the organisation, to be willing to try something and for it not to work. But even, Tiggy, as you said there, the willingness to kind of set aside resources to focus on something like this that may still fail. I wonder, Laleh, are you facing challenges with that at all, or is actually the university been quite accepting?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, you would want to be able to bring more tools in, because to be honest, in this day and age, there are so many more tools that can probably almost scrape the data for you. And again, it's just the expertise that you have in to be able to understand what this means meaningfully. And again, you know, if you can afford to be able to sort of invest in certain things that can give you really, really clear, simple kind of baskets that you can almost pull together yourself behind the scenes, and then to have somebody being able to kind of come in and help you draw out those expert insights, maybe through your third party, that's always really helpful. We can't cover everything in a university, even though we've got lots and lots of people that deal with data and they do it as their kind of day job. You know, there are still many things that we can't keep up with. And so from our perspective, it is a case of, yes, we're very lucky, but at the same time, we know there's a sort of limitation with how much we can do and internally. And I think, you know, when we work with third parties, we're always looking for that added value. So again, what will these people do when they help us bring in a new system, or they'll help us bring in some sort of, you know, way of putting on our processes in differently? What will any of the data that they're capturing look like, and how can we work with them to kind of make it more and more sophisticated is really important in terms of the planning piece. So there's elements of that in terms of, you know, how we can approach it. Yeah.
I wonder, there's a big topic at the moment, and it continues to rightfully be around kind of environmental impacts and social impacts. And I know, Laleh, you mentioned at the top when you introduced yourself around kind of the values of the organization as well. How, whether it's a conscious or a subconscious decision, is that part of service design? I guess that's a question to both of you.
I think it's got to be now. Yeah. I mean, there's quite a lot of external factors that are always pressing on you to think about those things. They're much more prevalent around, obviously, environmental standards, Sustainable Development Goals. I'll try not to use too many acronyms. But, you know, those are things that are actually embedded in sort of corporate deliverables. And, you know, we do need to kind of observe and also be quite proactive in terms of how we're trying to meet those. I mean, examples that we try and use in the HE sector is to kind of put our kind of quality assurance marks as part of our kind of ability to deliver our degrees and kind of create corporate citizens, if you like, of the future in terms of if they come and study with us. And, you know, we tend to try and gather those things a little bit as a kind of identity around our brand, but also to make sure that, you know, we are living those things. So really simple examples is that, you know, we tend to work with lots of professional bodies that kind of accredit us, and we're trying to look at our standards around how we might procure, how we might kind of work with partners, how we might influence kind of equality, diversity and inclusion for both our staff and students. And they're very, very mainstream pieces for us now. And, you know, they all sort of sit under the umbrella of our values. And I guess in the sort of service design piece, a really simple example that we've done is with our most recent kind of accreditation across quality, diversity, inclusion, which is to, again, submit for a Stonewall accreditation, is that we looked very much at our supply chain. Was it supportive of LGBT advantage? You know, was it looking at how we would work with, you know, goods and services that would reflect us as an organisation and our partnerships? So some of those things, you know, are absolutely central to what we will do with working with anybody in a procurement supply chain. But also we have to have that in the sort of, you know, capturing as part of our tendering and vendoring agreements. And we won't look at reducing that standard now. So if somebody isn't in line with some of those things and will not share their statements around how, you know, they're working in sort of internationally on these standards with us, we probably won't work with them in the future. So there is quite a bit behind it, but it takes time. You know, we can't do it all at the same time, and there needs to be sort of active encouragement in those spaces. So whether it's procurement, or whether it's working in research, or whether it's working on teaching and learning, things where we are trying to actively decolonize sort of curriculums, or we're trying to improve sort of outcomes around equality, diversity and inclusion, we will be rethinking our approach, and how can we then work again with students and staff to make sure it's embedded in what we do. So those are some of the kind of things that we're working through bit by bit.
And Tiggy, I guess with your chair of the board at Jessie May hat on, is that also something that's been kind of discussed there in terms of beyond service design for your service users, but having that kind of mindful, socially conscious, environmentally conscious thinking as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our service is interesting because we actually talk about the spiritual well-being of our children and our families, and also of our teams. So it's quite interesting to think about, how do you measure that? How do you measure that impact? And often I think the challenge comes where, by having a service there, it means that certain impacts that would have been felt are not felt. So for instance, with our service, often it means that potentially both parents can work, which is transformational for their lives, and for the children's lives as well. And had that service, our service provision, not been there, they probably couldn't have. But it's very difficult to then, so you can statistically look at across the country how many families who have children with life-limiting and life-threatening conditions are both parents able to work, but it's really hard to get hold of the data. So I think what we're trying to do is understand the impacts we want to make, and also the impacts that we don't want to happen to our families, but then finding data sources to back up what we believe to be true is sometimes challenging, but that's all part of the conversation, and the collaboration is right. How are we going to get this data? Because actually we need to reach out much wider than our own organisation to be able to gather this information. Does it even exist? Some of the challenges we face, but I think planning and talking about that and exploring how that might be possible is really important. And I know as a board we're all really interested in being able to demonstrate what amazing work and services are being provided, and hopefully using that to appeal for more funding, to be honest. So,
and the full value of those services as well,
because there's the initial immediate impact of providing the service, but then there's the wider social impact for families, and it's ongoing, it's long term. Because
well, even just then, that example you gave, if both parents are working, that means they're both able to still hopefully earn a pension, which means that effect might not be felt for decades, but the fact that that is possible does have an impact.
Yeah, it does. And in all of the organizations, I'm sure everybody who's on the call, there are different impacts, aren't there? But actually being able to understand environmentally and socially what a difference your service makes, and how you can improve that by actually just talking and focusing on it. Because I think sometimes those conversations, they just don't happen because they're not planned in. So we just need to make sure that actually, because that's important to us as organizations, we pull those things into the conversations about service design. So how can we make sure there is a longer social impact, a less negative impact on the environment from the things that we do, that actually our governance structures are right, so that we're involving teams in decisions, and that we're being ethical in where we invest our resources. These are all things that we should be thinking about within service design. Absolutely.
Before we wrap up, I just wondered if each of you could share your top tips, but conscious we do have people listening live, so if you did have any questions that you want to sneak in before the end, do pop them in the chat. But I know it's quite a big question, Laleh, but any advice or tips that you would give to those listening?
Yeah, I mean, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I often think be pretty optimistic about when you are starting on these journeys, because there is a little bit of, you need personal resilience, and you do need to kind of trust that actually the process will work through and will help you unpick some of those issues as you're doing them, even if it feels quite overwhelming in terms of that you're trying to start with quite a big problem, or it might feel a little bit of a sort of problem that's almost a bit hard to define because you're not entirely sure why it's there. And then hopefully, I think from my perspective is that people have got real expertise and they've got real insights, and to just keep asking for those and to be really kind of proactive around enjoying that experience and that excellence and that expertise in helping you work through these challenges. Because I think you can't do anything alone in sort of, as a one person. And I know it's obvious, the team is far, far better at delivering change than you individually. But if you're inspired by that and you're inspired by the journey, then I think it's always really positive that you'll end up coming out with something that you feel really proud of at the end, even if it's a small change. It could actually, as you say, leave a bit of a legacy for building something better in the future. And, as Tiggy was talking, I was just thinking about that whole thing about I'm happy to be a placeholder and a shareholder for somebody else to come along and to be able to do this work, but to build it up and to hopefully see that as being something that will make people feel that, we're still an organisation that is trying to progress and learn and develop and evolve and do something better. And, I like the fact that, there is lots of ambition to never stand still. so let it be part of the journey and enjoy it.
And Tiggy, any top tips from you?
I think I agree with what Laleh said about just enjoying the journey, because it can be stressful at times. I think planning the journey, it's really boring, but planning it, so having an idea of the approach you're going to use, who you want to engage, testing that out, I think is important. And I also think that bit about culture. So one of the things that we spend quite a bit of time doing when we're engaging with sort of senior leaders about these sorts of pieces of work is talking about how up for it are you in talking to your customers, your end service users, and hearing the truth and trying some stuff out, even if it's not perfect. Because culturally, if they're not up for it, then that sort of approach to design you'll start it, but then you won't be able to see it through. So I think there is a bit about engaging to see how, when people say, oh yes, we're really up for iterative service design, and we're really up for talking and trying it out, testing it out with people, just testing that that's true. Because once you start talking to people, they do give you their opinions and they do want to get engaged. So you don't want to start on that if actually there's not support from your leaders to say, yeah, we're really up for this and we really want to hear and we really want to get to the best possible service design and delivery that we can.
Yeah, and as you said, that planning and what are we going to do with this information is all around the expectation management of everyone, so that you can have really powerful sessions that do leave people inspired with both quick wins and plans to improve for the future.
And I don't know if you feel this as well, Tiggy, maybe just closing out the communication a bit as well is really important, because I think we always forget that actually we've achieved quite a change, but we've never really either celebrated or actually even marked it. And I think again, it's really quite important.
Recognizing that success.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And a great way to finish a session, I think. So for those who are watching either live or watching this back, you'll receive an email with details of how to book a free 90-minute workshop where we, as 9 Feet Tall, will help review your current service design process and help work with you and identify areas for improvement. So thanks to Laleh and to Tiggy, and for everyone for watching.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.